Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is K.T. McFarland. She served as Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump. She also served in the Nixon, Ford, and Reagan administrations. And she is the author of the recently published book, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. We want to get her reaction to the revelations that the FBI actually created notes outlining their goal to get former National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn to admit something or get him to lie with the goal of prosecuting him or getting him fired. And KT, thanks very much for being with us.
It's a pleasure and an honor.
Well, let's talk about what we learned. This is just yesterday. This news came out, and I'm reading from Catherine Herridge over at CBS News here about this single page of handwritten notes dated January 24th, 2017. So literally 4 days after the inauguration. This is also the same day as Flynn's White House FBI interview. The notes are lightly redacted and read in part, "We have a case on Flynn and the Russians." In a section titled Afterwards, it states, "What is our goal? Truth/admission, or to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired?" ? And then it says the notes continue, "If we get him to admit to breaking the Logan Act, give facts to DOJ and have them decide. If we're seen as playing games, White House will be furious." So, KT, as we have talked about when your book came out, you have always been very critical of what the FBI was doing here. What's your reaction to these particular revelations?
Well, I'm not the least bit surprised because that's what they were trying to do with me as well. Their goal was really twofold, I think, with General Flynn. Number one, and he was my immediate boss. I mean, we were together every day during the transition and during his first 3 and only 3 weeks at the White House. But their goal was to, as a preemptive strike against Flynn, because he was determined to do, as President Trump wanted him, a reform and streamlining of the sprawling intelligence community, which was 16 agencies, very expensive, not always right about things. And Flynn, who had been a reformer at the Defense Intelligence Agency, which he had headed during the Obama administration, he made it known that the Trump administration was going to take a serious look at the intelligence community and do some reorganization. So the deep state, whatever you want to call it, the senior leadership of the FBI, the FBI, the Justice Department, and the intelligence community decided they wanted to take Flynn out before he could execute something that would jeopardize their ability to continue doing things the way they had always liked to do things. That was number one. And number two was to do a real crippling blow to the Trump administration, because it wasn't just taking out General Flynn. They wanted General Flynn, they were trying to blackmail General Flynn, they were trying to blackmail me to either admit guilt to crimes we did not commit or to implicate others. In my case, it was to implicate Flynn or to implicate President Trump in crimes I didn't think they had committed. So it was a concerted effort. It was to entrap people. It was to create perjury traps. Now, let me explain what it means in real terms. What is a perjury trap? Well, it means that you haven't committed a crime. But when you talk to the FBI, by the way, they control all of your files, all of your text messages, phone logs, emails. They have them. You don't have them. They have them, and they let you see a little bit here, a little bit there, and then they quiz you on it. And if you make any kind of mistake, you get the wrong date, you say, well, I think that was Tuesday night and it was really Wednesday morning, then they can jump up and say, well, you should have known that. We think you're lying, therefore you're committing perjury. That's a perjury trap. And that's what they were doing to Flynn, myself, and a number of other people. They assumed that if they could get you in a perjury trap, even though you committed no real crime, they could get you to plead guilty to a crime you didn't commit, because otherwise you're facing either years of trying to defend yourself or sure bankruptcy, because to defend yourself costs, in my case, hundreds of thousands of dollars, in Flynn's case, millions. And they blackmailed Flynn even further by threatening to prosecute Flynn's son. So he pled guilty to a crime I don't think he committed. I don't think he felt he committed, and sacrificed himself for his son. So there we are.
What did they want you to admit to? What did they think was a crime, or they tried to make you believe was a crime that had happened that you knew something about?
Well, that was always a little vague. It wasn't a specifically laid out, you say this, we'll do that. It was implied. But the initial accusation was that General Flynn, and therefore President Trump, myself and others, had committed violations of something called the Logan Act. Now, it's a very obscure law. It's never been tested. It's probably unconstitutional. Nobody's ever been charged on it. And it was something that goes back to 200 years ago. And it says that private citizens can't conduct foreign policy on their own. And so the accusation was that General Flynn, as the incoming national security advisor, and Trump, as the incoming president, were private citizens. And they were conducting foreign policy by having conversations with the Russian ambassador. So I think it's wrong on every single score, but that was one of the theories that they had. The other was that they took a whole lot of press stories, some of which they had leaked to the press themselves, press stories, excerpts of emails and phone logs, Trump tweets, and they had concocted this elaborate theory, really based on the Steele dossier, this elaborate theory that Trump had colluded with the Russians during the campaign and that he was going to do Russia's bidding as president. There was no truth to it, as later even the Mueller investigation showed. But nonetheless, it gave them the pretext for going after Trump. Any pretext would have suited them. It was an effort by the Trump-hating bureaucracy, the Trump-hating press, and the outgoing members of the Obama administration who were still upset that Trump had won and not Hillary Clinton. It was an effort right from the beginning to hobble and destroy the Trump presidency. I was collateral damage. I was not important. And frankly, Flynn wasn't that important to them in that regard. It was all a way of getting to Trump.
Katie, as you know, there are those who are defending the FBI actions that are revealed in this note or memo, whatever you want to call it. They're saying, look, this is standard prosecutorial activity. You go in and you ask questions, and those asking the questions usually know more than the person answering the questions, and then you find out if they can confirm what you know, or maybe you can get them to lie. So what's your reaction to those saying this is standard operating procedure?
Well, the two FBI agents who initially interviewed General Flynn, their conclusion was he was not lying, that he was not evading, that he forgot a couple of things, but that he should not be charged with any crime. In my case, it was the same thing. You know, they can take honest lapses of memory and just confusing a date or two, and then they can spin it into a lie so that you have to prove that you're innocent. You have to say, well, it's legitimate that I couldn't quite remember that. You didn't give me the files so that I could check my own records. So I understand what people say, but Greg, here's the thing. We put enormous power and tools into the hands of the Department of Justice, into the FBI, into the intelligence community. And those are tools that we want them to use in a very ruthless way if they're going after terrorists or child molesters or mass murderers. But when they take those tools and use them against political opponents, that's when I think there's a real threat to the integrity of the American government. Did they know that they were going after people falsely? Yes, the Steele dossier has now been thoroughly disproven. And yet they still used it as an excuse, knowing that it had faulty origins. I mean, even some of the FBI people have come out and admitted they knew it had faulty origins. And yet it was the excuse that they used to go after Trump.
We're talking with KT McFarland, former Deputy National Security Advisor for President Trump, and as she said, worked very closely with General Flynn as the transition unfolded, as well as the early days of the Trump administration. Of course, there's James Comey, the former FBI director, who's director at the time of this. If you haven't seen this excerpt before, I'm sure you've seen it in the last 24 hours. Here he is in a chat with Nicole Wallace of MSNBC, just kind of casually talking about how he sent his guys over there at the very beginning of the Trump administration, hoping to take advantage of the fact that things weren't well established in terms of who gets to see who over there. Here's what he said.
You look at this White House now, and it's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the same room. How did that happen?
I sent them. Something I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration. In the George W. Bush administration, for example, or the Obama administration. In both of those administrations, there was process. And so if the FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official, you would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions and approvals and who would be there. And I thought, it's early enough, let's just send a couple guys over.
So, KT, had you heard that before? And if so, what do you make of it?
Saw it for the first time, and I've certainly read about it again and seen the clips again. Well, I mean, that's entrapment, right? I was sitting in the office immediately next to General Flynn's. I didn't know the FBI guys were coming over. If I had known, I would have told him to make sure he has a lawyer with him, but he didn't. And why didn't he? It's because when he talked to Comey and McCabe on the phone, they said, well, the implication was, yeah, you don't really need a lawyer. Well, that's exactly what they did to me. They showed up at my house. After I had left the administration, they showed up at my door and said they had a few questions to ask. And I said, well, do I need a lawyer? And they said, well, you're not the subject of anything. We just want to get some facts. We want to find out what the Russians did and how they interfered with the American election. And I said, well, I want to find that out too. I want to find that out even more than you do, because I've studied Russia and China my whole life. I want to know what they were up to as well to prevent them or anybody else from interfering with our elections going forward. But that wasn't really what they were after. They were, as these notes that have been revealed now, these notes revealed, they wanted to catch Flynn in a lie or a perjury trap and pressure him and blackmail him. And I don't think that's how you should conduct business with a president's national security advisor, with the only reason being that they had this specious, trumped up, excuse the pun, Steele dossier, which anybody who's read it, to me, I read it and I thought it looked like immediately realized it was Russian disinformation.
So, KT, you mentioned that the FBI agents left that meeting believing that Flynn was telling the truth. Ultimately, the FBI, led by Jim Comey, never brought charges against General Flynn. That came when the Mueller special counsel happened. So what's your read on why Comey didn't, but Mueller did go forward with that?
Well, remember, Comey was fired.
Right.
So he wasn't head of the FBI. Maybe he would have brought charges, who knows? But in the Mueller investigation, I know the way they treated me was, and I'm sure they treated General Flynn the same way and probably much worse. They had taken a series of events and leaks, some of which they probably had given to the media, taken transcripts that were classified transcripts that were in newspaper articles, and they used those to try to go after people, including General Flynn. At the end, the Mueller investigation determined that there really had been no collusion, but they had managed to ensnare General Flynn. Again, as I said, he sacrificed himself for his son. But why is the FBI listening to the National Security Advisor's phone calls? Who else's were they listening to? The day that General Flynn resigned, we found out that the Washington Post had a transcript of this phone call between Ambassador Kislyak and General Flynn. I didn't even know that it existed, and I had the highest security clearances there were. Not only did I not know it existed, I wasn't even cleared to read it, and yet the Washington Post got a hold of it. And Washington Post reporters were calling, asking Flynn if he had said this to the Russian ambassador, had he said that? How does something as so highly classified make its way not into the hands of government, not into the hands of elected officials, but into the hands of the Washington Post reporters? No one's ever explained that. And
what do you think happened?
I think everyone has some suspicions, but it could only have come from a few different places in the intelligence community. And here's where I am now on this, Greg. We've got to find out who these people were who prosecuted and persecuted General Flynn and others. And they have to be held responsible, because it's not going to work this time to just fire a couple of low-level people and say, oh, well, we're all cleaned up now, let's protect the institution. Decisions to wiretap national security advisors, those aren't made by mid-level government officials. They're made at the very highest level of government. So who are those people? Leaks to reporters where classified transcripts are passed off to reporters. That's not some mid-level bureaucrat. That's somebody pretty high up the food chain. So who are these people? And they should be prosecuted. And they should be prosecuted publicly and seriously. And otherwise, it'll happen again and again and again. There's just too much power concentrated into a few hands. And it's not just a couple of bad apples. It was a number of people at the highest levels of the intelligence community who set out to entrap General Flynn in an effort to bring down a president they didn't like. They thought the American people had made a mistake in electing Trump, and they were going to correct the mistake of the American people. Well, that's not in the Constitution, and that sure isn't a democracy.
One of the reasons this whole situation turned around for General Flynn is because of what just about everyone considers the excellent legal work of Sidney Powell. But of course, other people who might find themselves in this situation can't necessarily afford someone of the caliber of Sidney Powell. And so the idea, of course, goes out, and I think you just referred to it, is, well, if this can happen to the National Security Advisor of the President of the United States, who isn't vulnerable to something like this? So a lot of folks are out there saying, never talk to the feds, never even talk to law enforcement. I'm sure that's not ultimately the takeaway we want here. So I know prosecution is part of this because you don't want it to happen again to anyone else. But what are the other takeaways from this?
Well, my takeaway from this is a couple of things. One, don't ever see the FBI without a lawyer present. They're not necessarily your friend. I always thought they were. I always thought we were all on the same side. But what I've seen, and not just with myself, but others who worked for President Trump, certainly with General Flynn, you need to have legal representation with you at all times to protect yourself, even if you have to go broke hiring that lawyer. Secondly, I think going forward, I would never be in a meeting again unless I had my own tape recording of it, my own copy of the documents that came from it, because I know how difficult it is when you play by the rules. I played by the rules. When I left government, I turned over all my files. I turned over all my phone logs, all my emails, all my text messages, as I was required to do by law. I didn't keep copies. But as a result, once the Mueller investigation seized all of them, I did not have access to my own files. So it's pretty hard to defend yourself when you don't have any records to go on and you're just going on the basis of your memory of events that happened a year before, when about an email that you might have received when I received a couple hundred a day. So that would be the second takeaway. And the third one is, unless we are going to have trust restored in government, in these institutions, the FBI, the Justice Department, the intelligence community, I think the only way we get that confidence restored is if the people who were responsible for this, as more and more evidence has shown that they were, if not breaking the law, they were certainly breaking the spirit of the law, that they need to be held accountable.
KT, we'll have to call time there. Thank you very much, as always, for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
KT McFarland is a former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump. She served in the Nixon, Ford, and Reagan administrations. Her new book is Revolution: Trump, Washington, and We the People. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.